Okay.
All right, great. Hey folks, my name is Dee Schur. I am the OASIS Standards Advocate. I appreciate you joining us today. This is the Variability Exchange Language Briefing. We hope that the briefing will run about 30 minutes, maybe a little less. The intent is to be very informal. We want folks to get an appreciation for this technical committee. What we will do is we will be recording, and I will communicate with all of you and send you the link of the recording following the briefing. At the end, we will have a question and answer session. At that point, you can unmute yourself or type your question into the chat box. I did already try that, so that should go well. The way we're going to do this is Uwe Reisel from Pure Systems will do an overview of VEL, and then I will talk a little bit about OASIS participation, not too much of that, and again, will be followed by the question and answer period. We're fortunate to have Chet Ensign, also from OASIS, join us today. He is the Chief Technical Community Steward. He is on board to answer process questions if any of those arise in the end. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Uwe. Again, Uwe Reisel from Pure Systems. Thanks, Uwe.
Yes, thank you, Dee. So today I want to talk about what is the intention of a variability exchange language. And Chet, can you go to the next slide, please? So in this slide, I want to provide some information about the challenge we want to solve. So on the right, you see the systems development. So the intention, what we want to do, or what is done here, is development of systems. And this is usually done by many tools. So for example, there are tools for requirements, tool for the implementations, tools for the testing, and so on. And when we talk about such systems, these systems usually also contains variability, which have to be managed. This managing cannot be done by the tools itself, because there are so many of them. That's why we need an special variant management, which you see on the left side, which has the complete knowledge about the variability and which controls the variability and the creation of variants. So the creation of artifact variants is one goal we want to solve. And so we need, for example, variants of requirements for a specific project, or variants of code, for example, or also variants of tests, which have to be run to check a specific code variant. And the question is how this can be done. So when we talk about variant management, so we have to use such a variant management tool. And the steps we want to take, or we have to take to create a specific artifact variant is started using to create a configuration. That means we have to select some features. So features define some abstract functionality we want to have in the variant. And the variant management tool itself can now check the selections of the features, if they are valid or not. And if they are valid, the task would be to create an artifact variant. So to do that, the variant management tool have to communicate with the development tools. So as minimum, they have to import the variation points, which is shown here in the middle. Actually, it could also import the artifacts itself, but this would be too many information which have to be transferred. And so it makes sense to reduce that to describe only the variation points. What do I mean with variation points? So for example, if we have a code and we have 3 different implementations, for example, for a component, for 3 different features, the important things we have to know is only that there is a variation point with 3 alternatives, and this and how these alternatives are mapped to the features. So this would be the part of the variation points. And using the selected features, we can now determine or resolve the variation points to a specific variation of that and save it in a configuration. And this configuration can now be sent back to the development tool, for example, requirement tool, which now have enough information to create the variant, which is usually a subset of artifacts which are already part of a development or already in the development tools. So, and that cycle, so that data flow, have to be done for each of the development tools. And the question is how we can do that. So, in current state, can you go to the next slide, please? So the current state is that we have variant management tools, we have requirement tools and code, so implementation tools and test tools. And for each tool or each kind of artifact, and in worst case also for each tool, we have to implement or define and implement a communication workflow. So in that case, as you see here, we have different languages, which of course means that we have to define a language for each tool, and for variant management side, we have to implement all the things, all the interfaces, all the languages, which is of course takes many effort and of course should be avoided. So next slide, please. So that we have learned from a very old project, so some thousands years ago. Some people in Babel have also that problem, and of course, as you know from the history, when we use many languages, then the communication is very difficult. We have to translate all the things, and this is not what we want. So next slide. So that is actually what we really want. So instead of using different languages, different interfaces, actually we only need one interface, one communication interface to exchange the needed data between the tools and the variant management. And this would be the ideal solution. Next slide, please. And the goal would be that we have one language and which describes, in that case, the variation points, and displayed using that triangle brackets. They should be some, in our case, XML, but it should be some formal language to have a formal way to exchange the data. Okay, next one. And actually, that is the purpose of a variability exchange language. So it should be, close the gap between the system development tools and the variant management tools, and should be able to exchange the variation points, not the artifact itself, and configurations how the variation points should be resolved. And this is actually the minimal information, so that the development tools can work together, and artifact variants can be created. So, next slide, please. So, what should be part of a VEL standard? So it should define data structures, and it should define the artifact variability. It should not define the artifacts itself, only the variability. So we have to define variation points and give in, for example, some names. And for each variation point, we have several variations, which would be, for example, can you go back? It was too fast. And that could be for variations can be alternative or optional, and have also names. And we need for each of the variations, so of each of the alternatives, for example, some conditions which describe under which condition, under which condition this variations should be selected. So that the user should not select the variation points itself. They depend on some other source which is outside the scope of VEL. Usually some kind of features or or variability model will be used, but it's not part of this VEL standard. Both because we have to resolve variability, we have to also define the binding times. So it could be the case that we define the binding times on configuration time, or we can also define that the variations or the variation points or variability should be resolved at compile time or even at runtime, so that during runtime also the variation points can be changed. To describe the condition, so the mapping to the features or some other things, we use expressions, but VEL will not define an own language for that. We use some existing languages, and it can be also defined which language will be used. So we will also be quite open for any expression language to define some conditions. So it should be not restricted to, for example, one specific language. And I have mentioned that the artifacts itself are not part of a VEL standard, but we have to know to which artifacts they are related. So we have to define also some kind of links or references to some artifacts or elements in artifacts. For example, for requirements could be some single requirements, or for code it could be lines of code or some blocks or something else. And as I mentioned, this would be only for this was too fast. And the last point would be, of course, we need not only to describe the variation points and the variations, but also to define a specific configuration, which is later on needed to create a specific artifact variant. So now you can go to the next slide, please. So to summarize what we want to do with a variability exchange language, so we want to define, or in the technical committee, we want to define an interoperability standard that will enable the exchange of variability information among the variant management tools and system development tools. Also, we want to define with that a common variability data interface that can be implemented by both the development tools and variant management tools. And with that, VEL will enable a continuous development process for variable systems and more flexible use of tools. So, and if we use that, we can also eliminate the cost of building customized interfaces because it's not needed anymore by defining a standard way for information to be exchanged among the corresponding tools. So, next slides, please. So, what is the current state of standardization? So the VEL Charter was submitted already and accepted. The call for comments, which is the first phase, was completed. Some 2 weeks ago, the call for participation has started and is still running. Currently, also the nomination of the chairs should be done. It's not yet done, and there's still time to join with voting rights on this technical committee until next 7th of November, which is 7 days before the first meeting, which will be on 12th of November between 4 and 5 p.m. Central or European time. And there's also the voters which are have joined will also be published later on. So what is the expected effort for participants? we will have regular telcos or web access where you can where you have to participate, and between the telcos we have to also do some work. So we have the participants or the members have to review and comment the draft specification. So there is also already a draft for the specification, which should be now refined and be completed. So next slide. So what are the, or from which part should, or which kind of members we are searching to participate in VEL? Of course, since we want to define an interface for some tools, the system development tool providers and also variant management tool providers are important parties for the standard, because at the end we have to implement this interface if we want to use that. Also, the product line and application engineers are important because they are actually use later on the functionality of VEL. They don't see it, but they have to implement their use cases. So if VEL doesn't provide the use cases they are needed later on to create variants, then of course the standard will not meet their needs. But VEL can be also used on the other side, for example, for product line researchers. They can use the VEL interface to get information from the tools, the variability itself, to, for example, to analyze things. So now, to analyze the things for the existing variability, and the involved industries of course, all kind of industries which have many variability, for example, automotive or aerospace. So next slide, please. So, and with the current technical committee members, I want to hand over back to Dee.
So Dee, are you with us?
I am. Terrific. So can you advance to the next slide?
Okay.
So we're really excited about this work coming to OASIS. We have had a lot of enthusiasm around the work. There have been several companies that have expressed an interest in participating. So clearly there is a need in this space for creating this specification. Just briefly, I want to just chat a minute about what your company gets out of participating in OASIS and specifically in VEL. Your company will be recognized for your commitment to interoperability. The most important thing, I think, first and foremost, is the opportunity to influence the direction of the specification. You know, if you're not at in the tent, then you can't really have a lot of impact on the outcome. So that's really primarily the main thing. Again, if you join OASIS, you have the right to contribute ideas and comments, use cases, implementations. You get a head start on compliance. You get to have, again, the inside track as the specifications being developed. The next slide, Chet. The other thing that often we find is specifically engineers, developers will say, well, why should I particularly participate? You want to go to the next slide, Chet? There is a lot of personal benefits to participating in OASIS. I'm always pleasantly surprised when I go to folks' LinkedIn pages, and often they will make a note of their participation in a specific OASIS technical committee. You know, there's lots of things that we do for outreach to bring focus to your company and to you individually as the specification is being developed. You know, when you think about, you know, the other kinds of benefits, if you are a user of VEL tools, you want to make certain that your requirements are considered. It will also help you in choosing products, making certain that your tools interoperate. If you are a tool vendor, obviously you want to make certain that your tool complies with the specification as it's being developed. Let's see. Chet, can you advance the slide? Am I stuck for some reason? Okay, there we go. You can also personally add, you know, add credibility by making a contribution, just the opportunity to be in a highly collaborative, open environment. The other thing that we hear our members say really often is they use the experts within a technical committee as an additional R&D resource. Imagine that you have access to folks that are truly expert in that area, and whether or not you are, you will still gain tremendous value from collaborating with other experts in a vendor-neutral environment. Again, we have to really focus on that because that's the beauty of participating in OASIS. Let's see, and of course, advice from other TC members. If you're in a jam and you're stuck at a point, you can easily contact anyone in the technical committee, and you'd be amazed how quickly you can resolve your problem. So next slide, Chet. What's required to be involved in the technical committee? The most important thing is you have to join OASIS. There are membership dues, sign a membership application, which means that everyone that participates agree to the IT. And then once you do that, join OASIS, you subscribe to the email list. If you decide to you're in the driver's seat in terms of the amount of participation that you and others in your company want to do. One thing I want to point out about OASIS membership is there's no limit to the number of folks that can get involved in the technical committee, this technical committee, or any other technical committee within OASIS. And there's complementary work for this particular TC that's going on within OASIS. So there are other committees that might be of interest to you and your colleagues. If you, again, decide to join as a voting member based on attendance, you have the ability to obviously vote, attend. Uwe mentioned the bi-weekly conference calls. This will be, the cadence of the TC meetings will be set, democratic process by the folks that are on the technical committee. You know, of course, contribute ideas, which we already talked about. There is an opportunity if the technical committee, you know, as a group makes a decision to hold a face-to-face meeting, you can attend that, but there's always the ability to call in. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's see, next slide. Okay, so let's talk about dues for a minute. I can talk to any of you individually about this following the call, and again, I will be following up. There are essentially two levels of membership within OASIS. The contributor level, they're very much the same. They're identical in the technical participation benefits. So again, unlimited number of people can participate in any TC. The difference between sponsor and contributor is marketing and visibility. Sponsor level members will be quoted in the press release, and we will have a press release, probably, of course, timing depends on the holidays, which are right around the corner. But again, there will be a press release, quoted in the press release. Your logo will be on the OASIS homepage, opportunities for discounts to participate in interoperability demonstrations. We're always looking for events for that. I think this particular technical committee might be a great example of a technical committee that does do a live interoperability demonstration, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. There are lots of options for that coming down the road. Again, those are primarily the benefits of sponsor level membership. We do have individual options. I'm happy to talk to anyone about those as well. Next slide. I think we're almost perfect on timing. So at this point, what I would like to do is, Chet, why don't we go ahead and turn off the recording?